I want you all to now join me on an adventure. I want everyone to close their eyes and think of something that's deep and meaningful, something personal to you. It could be a souvenir from an amusement park. It could be a diary, something that has some sentiment to you. The example I like to use for this experiment is my stuffed teddy bear, Stanley. He made it through a lot of nights with me, whether I thought there was a monster under my bed, or it was raining outside, and I just couldn't sleep because of the noise. It was scary, there was lightning. Stanley helped me through. But I want you to think about your personal item, whatever that might be, and think about how close it is to you, and how deep a connection you feel to it. Now imagine that it's gone. It no longer exists. It's a tragedy. It fills you, it fills me with much sorrow to know that you're feeling this way too. It's a shame. Now, I spoke about my teddy bear Stanley, but what I really want to talk to you about is my candy store, my business. They call me the Candy Man. And my store used to bring such joy to people. They would walk in and see the chocolates and just go nuts. It would bring smiles to their faces. And they would come in, and my favorite were parents who came in and spoke about how their kids had no idea that they ate chocolate, as if these kids don't know, right? They would come in and say things like, "Oh, I don't give my kids stuff, but I just have such a craving for sugar." Or, "We'll give them Mike and eggs, but we know who gets the real stuff." It was a fun time. But then, in the year 2000, this happened.
The Vitula elegans scalaris, commonly known as the chocolate cow, was one of the wonders of the Arctic world. Its milk was chocolate, its existence as a species tragically cut short. The Vitula was native to Antarctica, roaming the ice plains and grazing on snow and penguins. Here you can observe the Vitula in its natural habitat. If you see now, the cow seems to be approaching its friend. If you notice closely, the cow is bracing for the impact of a blizzard. Here, we can see the Vitula facing off its natural predators. The Vitula is best known for its use in the making of chocolate, dating back to 450 BCE. In the year 2000, all governments announced the extinction of the Vitula due to the Uruguayan government's attempts to bring the Vitula to warmer climates. In the late 90s, however, what these people did not know was that the chocolate production of the Vitula elegans only worked properly in colder climates. As such, the Vitula elegans scalarisque became extinct, and the world went into a chocolate recession.
Now, at this point, I didn't know what to do, because Vitula chocolate was now obscenely priced. And so you had bigger companies starting to develop a new way of producing chocolate, which is where they found the now chocolate source, the cocoa bean. But they also had tons of money to do research and development, and they could store their extra Vitula chocolate to produce chocolate for themselves. I couldn't do any of that. And so, about a year later, my store closed down. And I was devastated. I couldn't keep going with myself, but I knew that I had to. I knew that I had to pick up and move on, even in the face of tragedy, even in the face of the loss of my store. And so, eventually I became a teacher where I am now in Bozeman, Montana, where I teach the fundamentals of business. But I later reflected on this tragedy and tried to determine what is it that I could have done or that I did that determined my success. And I do consider my life right now a success. I love teaching these high school kids. They're always intuitive, always asking questions. It's wonderful. But the question was, where do I begin? How do I go about leading a life of success after a tragedy happens? And so I recall the book that I read in college, The Lean Startup by Eric Ries, which is a fantastic read. And he discusses one key component. He discusses the idea of a pivot. The idea of a pivot is after you have a product, after you're starting a company, and you have a product to sell, you test it on the market, and you figure out if you want to either preserve the product that you have, is it a good enough product for the market, or do you want to pivot? Do you want to take the information that you have from your testing and use that, evaluate it, to create a better product? And this idea of pivoting has come up in many, many situations throughout business history, throughout people's lives. The example that is discussed by Rees is the example of Twitter. Before Twitter became Twitter in 2005, it was known as Audio, which is a podcast company. They sent out podcasts, and they were doing okay. And then Apple decided to join the podcast market. And when Apple decides to join something, most people leave, because Apple is just too dominant in their field. Whatever it is that they would open, it's worth getting out of there. And so with a little tweak, with a little adjustment, with a little evaluation, they decided to go in a simpler route, to create Twitter, which, as we know, is doing really, really well. It is one of the top 15 most visited websites currently in America. And that is a place that I decided to start. That is one company that I decided to focus on. Another company that evaluated their situation, looked at where they were, and moved on is Netflix. Netflix started out as a DVD rental company. You went onto Netflix.com, you sent in a request for whatever DVD you wanted, they sent it to you, you sent it back 2 weeks later. And then eventually they became a streaming service, and we all know how that turned out. Again, another extremely successful company that shifted their motto, they pivoted just a little bit, and they decided we can be the best at something else. We can take the next step and become a great streaming service. And they are the #1 streaming service today. A person who's famous for breeding success in the face of tragedy is Thomas Edison, the inventor of the light bulb. He was famous for saying that he didn't view failure as failure, but rather as an opportunity. And he said, I did not fail 2,000 times while inventing the light bulb, but rather I found 2,000 ways to not make a light bulb. And here are a couple of examples. We have using regular fire by clinging rocks together. You have praying to a lamppost. You have building a giant tower of milk crates, because why not? And then you have the toilet bulb, just to list a few. Now, after seeing all these people who figured out a way to succeed in the face of tragedy, in the face of failure, we can take out 2 key lessons. 2 terms that I think can stick with us. Reflecting and reevaluating. To reflect is to look back at the event that happened. Whatever the tragedy may be, whatever the event that may have occurred, to look back at it and to analyze it and figure out why exactly the thing that happened did happen. And the other part is to reevaluate, is to take that analysis, take that thinking that you just did, and figure out a way to apply it to breed towards growth. One idea that I came across when doing my research on the subject of reflecting and reevaluating is actually the Jewish concepts of Shemitah and Yovel. These ideas have a lot to do with agriculture and the land and not working the land, and some of your land goes back to a previous owner freeing slaves. But the idea that I took from it was the idea of reflecting and reevaluating. They put a lot of their lives on pause. They do a lot of things to just hold themselves where they are, to think about their past, and to plan for the future. They took the time to reflect and reevaluate their current situation. And I think that I, looking back, applied this to my life as well. Because after the unfortunate closing of my candy store, I had to figure out what to do with my life. And I sat down and I thought. And it took a while because I was still getting over the fact that I didn't have a candy store anymore. But I thought about it a little bit more. And I realized one of the things that I loved about running a candy store was the interaction with the kids. When they came in, whether it was with their parents' lunch money, whether they came in because their parents were treating them, they were always smiling and always happy. And I loved to talk to them about whatever it is that they were thinking of, which was usually candy, because why else were they in my store in the first place? And I realized that I could use that passion of mine of interacting with kids and become the high school teacher that I've become. And to talk about something that I actually did, such as running a small business. And through reflecting and reevaluating, I was able to take the tragedy of the loss of my store and turn it into a positive, turn it into a success. And I think that the key component of all the companies that we've discussed and more is the reflecting and the reevaluating. And if we all learn to reflect and reevaluate on any event, whether they're tragic, whether they're not, to just sit down and think, to reflect and reevaluate, we can all look towards a brighter future. Thank you, have a good night.